الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Inshallah, we'll have a brief conversation and I'll allow for questions and answers afterwards, or questions and suggestions afterwards. The topic that I have in mind, since we were speaking of salam, or we spoke about our relationship with other groups of people of other groups of faith or other religions, is the relationship with non-Muslims, relationships of Muslims with non-Muslims. What sort of relationship should we have, jurisprudentially, ethically, morally, spiritually? Perhaps there are different ways of approaching this subject, and there has been throughout the history, there has been times where this was not something that concerned the believers, and times that they did not even think about it. It didn't even occur to them due to the nature of their lifestyle and their neighborhood and so on. However, for many of us living in the West, this is definitely something that concerns us, and it's a question that occurs to us, and we need to understand it. Earlier I asked a question about salam, and whether or not we can say salam to non-Muslims. And I need to clarify that we have differences of opinion amongst our scholars with regards to salam and greeting non-Muslims. And I'll come to that. However, it was very obvious that within our gathering we had differences of opinion and lack of full understanding. And so I think it's very important for us to know how do we interact and what sort of relationship should we have with our fellow neighbors, colleagues, co-workers, classmates, wherever we are, whoever we interact with. If they are not Muslim, how do we interact with them? There are a number of ayat of the Holy Quran. If we look at them in isolation, it would make people think that Quran and Islam promotes some level of hostility towards non-believers. However, I urge mu'mineen and mu'minat, and I urge all my brothers and sisters, whoever can hear me, to understand that Quran is a message that should be understood as a total message. Never look at any of the ayat of the Holy Quran in isolation of other ayat and in isolation of the context of the ayah itself. We have to understand Quran or the ayat of the Holy Quran in their context, and we also have to understand them in light of other ayat and other concepts introduced in the Holy Quran. There are some ayat that if we look at them on a surface level, they may seem that they contradict other ayat of the Holy Quran on a surface level. And some of our very spiritual scholars actually have a concept. They say if we don't see this contradiction in appearance, therefore we have not reached a higher level of understanding. What they mean is, the beauty of the Quran is that it addresses the variety of circumstances, and if it did not address those and it looked always as if it's the same and there was no apparent contradiction, therefore it has not addressed the variety of circumstances and the exceptions and the differences in the society and the communities. The beauty of the Quran is that it covers it all. It covers all sorts of circumstances. It covers all sorts of people and communities. And this is why, on a surface level, you may see certain level of contradiction. But if you look deeper, you will understand that it's all fine. It's all actually synced with one another, with each other. There is a saying that they say they came to a specific scholar, and they asked him a question, and he said, yes, this is correct. Clarifying questions, a true or false question. Someone else came and asked him the opposite, the opposite of what the first one asked. And he also said, yes, you're correct, you're right. A third person came and said, there's something wrong with you. Anyone who comes to you and you say you're right. The first one said something, you said you're right. The second one said the opposite and said you're right. And so this scholar said to this person who was complaining, you're right. Yeah? In other words, everyone could have some validity in their what they're representing. From their perspective, what they're representing could be true, could be valid. And you don't need to start with denying or rejection. You can agree with them. In fact, agreeability is a great characteristic that Ahlul Bayt also promoted, al-muwafaqa. The Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, one day inshallah will have specific conversations about marital issues and how husband and wife should deal with one another. In a hadith, a beautiful hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says one of the best ways of dealing with your spouse is al-muwafaqa, to agree with them, to be more agreeable, rather than always no, wrong, reject. No, be agreeable. Agree, and then you can clarify, correct. But start with agreeing. So if we look at the ayat of the Holy Quran, on the surface we might see some level of contradiction. However, if we look deeper, we'll find that no, they're all in line with one another because of the greater principle that we look at. The greatest principle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us in the Holy Quran, God is telling us to begin with that principle. Every chapter begins with that principle, and the chapter of Fatiha, the opening of the Holy Quran, begins with that principle, is the principle of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When He says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rahman and Rahim are beautiful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are gentle even on our physical body. The way you pronounce them is beautiful, is gentle. By the way, the beauty of the Arabic language is that words, and most languages have such beauties in the way they developed, that specifically in Arabic, the terms often, the way you say a term, or the term is introduced in a way that's in line with its meaning. So when we speak of something that's harsh, you would, perhaps even the term harsh is harsh, yeah? The way you say it. Whereas, for instance, the term Rahman or Rahim, and especially Rahim, it's so gentle, the way it is even pronounced. On the body it's gentle, on the soul it's even more gentle. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces Himself in the Holy Quran, in the greatest ayah of the Holy Quran, the ayah that is the first of his opening of the Fatiha, and then a part of the ayat or a part of the beginning of every chapter. The ayah is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. He introduces himself with what? With Rahman and Rahim. Meaning what? This is a principle. Allah, God, is telling us, this is how you should see me. This is how you should understand me. Understand God and see God through the lens of mercy. Rahman, Rahim. This is the lens you should look through. This is how you should understand God. Rahman and Rahim. Anything that contradicts that, it's not correct. Anything. Now, of course, we have to understand that the contradiction in my mind as an average person is not necessarily a contradiction. I perceived it as contradiction. So for instance, if hellfire contradicts Rahman and Rahim in my mind, it is not that it's contradicting, it's my perception of it. Okay, I lack understanding. But the reality of it is that it is encompassed within the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even the hellfire. The dua that we recite on Thursday night introduces, or the Imam Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam reminds us and begins the dua with what? With the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma inni as'aluka birahmatika. And what is it? Allati wasa'at kulla shay. Your mercy that it encompassed everything. This principle is one of the cores through which we need to understand the entire Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to his prophet Musa alayhi salam, he says, Ya Musa, bring people closer to me and make them love me. Not that God needs our love. It's good for them. Our nearness to God is good for who? Good for us. So God wants us to get closer to Him and love Him. He says, make people love me. Make them closer to me. Only the good ones? No, everyone. In dua of Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, the Imam says, oh, the one whose mercy is available and his blessings are available for at-ta'i'in wal-'asin, for the obedient ones as well as the disobedient ones, the sinners. This is the principle. So the principle is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It encompasses everything. Good, the bad. If anyone is able to live, breathe, have sustenance and survive, it is through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this is a principle. We come to other ayat in the Holy Quran where God is, for instance, commanding us as believers to be harsh, to be tough. Describing, for example, the believers. He says, amongst each other they are ruhama, they have mercy. What about the enemy? Against the enemy, they are ashidda, they're rough and tough against the enemy. In Surah Al-Fatih, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the last ayah of the surah, He says, Muhammadur Rasulullah, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He says, وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ, those who are with Him, they are أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ, رحماء بينهم. They are very harsh and tough. They're firm when it comes to kuffar. But amongst each other they are merciful. رحماء بينهم. So now we have, God describes the believers as tough, firm. Could we then say this is against the mercy of God? Can we suggest that this is against God's mercy? Toughness, harshness. In some ayat, He commands the believers to, and I want to make this point very clear. Please make sure you listen to the entire, or you listen to this entire discussion. Don't take anything out of context. Yeah? In some ayat, God says, kill them wherever you find them. اقتلوهم حيث ثقفتموهم. That sounds harsh, don't you think? How do we put that with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim? On a surface level, one could argue that this does not go well with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you know what some people suggest? There are people who suggest that this ayah, اقتلوهم حيث ثقفتموهم, applies to every non-believer. There are people who suggest that. And I say these people are either ignorant or hypocrites. They have an agenda. Either ignorant or hypocrites. There's no third. Either they have an agenda against the Quran, against Islam, against the message of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, against the message of mercy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to His messenger that we did not send you except a mercy to the worlds. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. To the worlds. Ya Rasulullah, we sent you only as a mercy to the worlds. He was sent as a mercy. Now, are we isolating certain worlds from other? He says, رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. In dua at-tawassul we begin, Allahumma inni as'aluka bi nabiyyika nabiy ar-rahmah Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi. The messenger of what? The introduction is the messenger of mercy. Bi nabiyyika nabiy ar-rahmah. The messenger of mercy. Nabiy ar-rahmah. And he is in the Quran introduced as rahmatan lil alameen. The concept of mercy is the core. The beginning of the Quran is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And I've said it before. Many attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have been used. God has many attributes. Some suggest that there are 99 names. Correction. There is one hadith that mentions those 99 attributes or names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not limited to that. Many names He has. In Dua al-Jawshan, how many names do we have? 1,000 names. 100 of 10. In every section, there are 10 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, 100 section is 1,000. Is my math correct? 1,000 beautiful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through which we seek His protection. Yet, out of all His beautiful attributes, in fact, His names are not even limited to the 1,000. Even if the entire ocean was to be ink, and the trees were to be pens, the words of God, His beautiful names and words and attributes would not finish. If you were to use the entire ocean as ink, مَا نَفِدَتْ كَلِمَاتُ اللَّهِ. It would never finish. Out of all of those, He chose to introduce Himself to you and I with what? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Some of you may recall I made this, we had a session on Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Fatiha. In Surah Al-Fatiha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by introducing himself with what? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The compassionate, merciful, beneficial. There are many translations, but there are two beautiful aspects of the mercy of God, Rahman and Rahim. Then we come to the next ayah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. The worlds. What's the next ayah? Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, again. Some of our scholars, they say, he put, now we are looking at linear, yes? Here it's a linear, in terms of words, we cannot have three-dimensional words. We're looking at 2 dimensions, before and after. Before Al-Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. After Al-Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Meaning what? Meaning all the worlds are encompassed by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything is encompassed by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whenever we look at any ayat that promote harshness, toughness, war, fight, killing, we have to understand that those are for specific reasons and times, and they are within the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't go against it. They don't contradict the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning what? Would you consider a government that does not set any punishment, does not have any consequences for criminals, would you consider that government a wise or an intellectual government, or would you say they don't know what they're doing? If there is absolutely no punishment. Now, whether or not we have the capital punishment, that's a different story. It's a controversial issue, we'll leave it alone. Okay? In Islam, if somebody kills an innocent person intentionally, deliberately, intentionally kills an innocent person, the punishment is the capital punishment. Some states in the United States still have the capital punishment. Other states don't have it. Some countries in the world have it, others don't have it. That is besides the point. But some sort of punishment is set. If a criminal is not punished, that goes against the goodness of that society and that government. If you let the government, the criminals get away with anything, then you're not being merciful anymore. You're not being decent anymore. There has to be accountability. And therefore, the hellfire or those punishments and those ayat in the Holy Quran describing some of those punishments do not go against the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Back to our conversation. Now we have the discussion again about how do we deal with people of other faith, other groups of faith, other religions. We have to understand the differences between those people according to the ayat of the Holy Quran so that we understand the rulings. I mentioned earlier that we have, for example, some who say if someone is not Muslim, you're not allowed to say salam to them. Yes? Where did that ruling come from? We have differences amongst our scholars. However, it came from a situation where you cannot befriend the non-believers. Any of them? No. The ayat are very clear. It is those who are in war with the believers. If someone is at war with you, with your community, in Farsi they say, in a fight you don't give sweets. Somebody is fighting you and you come and give them candy. Now if it's a strategy, maybe it works, I don't know. It could be a strategy. But in general, if somebody is fighting, you defend. Okay? That concept of, if somebody slaps you on the right, you give them the left, it is something that we will discuss another time. Okay? If that is a way of guiding them, by all means. If that is a way of de-escalation, by all means. But if that is a way of encouraging them to do the wrong thing and continue doing the wrong thing, then no, that's not correct. By allowing some oppressor to continue oppressing, we're not doing them or ourselves or the society a favor. It's a disfavor to the society and to the world, in fact. So the relationship with non-believers or people of other groups of faith should be based on their relationship with you. If they are at peace with you, then should you have anything other than peace towards them? Of course not. In fact, earlier one of the brothers mentioned, Quran says, if somebody greets you with a greeting, then greet them with a better one, or at least the same. And this is where the wujub, the obligation of responding to salam is from. If somebody says salam to you, what do you say to them? You have to say salam to them. Yes, our scholars, they differentiate. They say if somebody is a non-believer, instead of giving the response in plural, you give it in singular. Okay? For a reason. If he says salamun alaykum, for example, you respond salamun alayka as an individual. Okay? Upon you as an individual rather than a group. This is a ruling, and it has its justification or explanation. That is not my discussion, and it's not my, I'm not in a position to even give a verdict to say this is correct or this is incorrect or this is how it should be or should not be. Nevertheless, what I'm trying to say is that those rulings are given with certain conditions based on the ahadith and the understanding of the ahadith of these scholars. However, the principle of being at peace to those who are at peace with you remains. Quran says the enemy who's fighting you, if they go towards peace, what do? You go towards peace. وَإِن جَنَحُوا لِلسِّلْمِ, those who are fighting you, they go towards peace, go towards peace. فَاجْنَحْ لَهَا, a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning the principle of peace supersedes. It is a higher principle. The principle of mercy is always there. Peace, Allahu huwa salam. I mentioned earlier, we cannot find a name for God against peace as salam. In fact, it doesn't make sense. He cannot have an attribute and the opposite of it. Does it make sense? So for instance, he is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, and then somebody suggests that he is then none of those. It does not make sense. Yeah? So he is Kareem. Can we ever imagine God for the generous? Okay? Can we imagine God to be the generous and now, and imagine a hypothesis, okay? They're not generous. Can you imagine that? Or the stingy? Bakhil. Can we, wal-'ayadu billah, we seek refuge to God from such even thoughts that we suggest that he is. You know who did that? Quran says, certain group of faith, with no mention of name, they said, Yadullahi maghlula. وقالت اليهود يد الله مغلولة. They said that the hands of God are tied. Meaning what? That that God is stingy. That is what they say. God in that sense, he says, غُلَّتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَلُعِنُوا. They're cursed and they are the ones whose hands are tied. Such statements they make against God. He is the generous. Yeah? He is the peace. Can you find an attribute of God that suggests that he is the war, for example? Of course we cannot. It doesn't make any sense. Therefore, if you're dealing with people who come to you in peace, what do? You come to them in peace, with peace. Again, the discussion is, how do we deal with non-Muslims around us? Co-workers, colleagues, friends, classmates, whatever, neighbors, non-Muslims. How do we deal with them? The principle that the Prophet has set is kindness, mercy, goodness. Not just in his words, in his actions. We all know the famous story of the Prophet having a neighbor who used to harm him all the time, putting trash in his way, throwing trash on his doorstep, and so on. When the Prophet did not see him, he asked about him. They said he's sick, he's unwell. What did he do? He went to visit him, because to visit the one who is unwell is a virtuous act. It is a recommendation from the Prophet ﷺ. Iyadatul marid. He went to visit him. When you go to visit them, you pray for them. You pray for their well-being. What is that? You're praying for the well-being of somebody who was harming you. This is akhlaq of the Prophet. And somebody comes to me and says, no, the Prophet would not say salam to them, for example. He goes to his neighbor who was harming him to say what? To say a prayer for them, for their well-being. Iyada is what? When you go and visit your neighbor who's unwell. What is it? To have good wishes, or to wish for them to, die, for example. How did the man change? Completely changed to decide, and at that point, he decided that he wants to be a follower of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Up until then, he was an enemy. He became a follower. In the school of Ahlul Bayt, we consider a Nasibi meaning an enemy of the Prophet and his family. We consider them what? A non-believer. One who has animosity for the Prophet or his progeny or collectively is a non-believer. Okay? Now a story. Imam Hassan alayhi salam is in Medina. The propaganda of Muawiyah in Sham made people believe that the Prophet or the family of the Prophet, specifically Imam Ali alayhi salam and his family, are advantageous individuals who did not believe, who did not pray, and who were fighting against the believers. This was the media machine and the propaganda of Muawiyah lanatullah alayh. So a man comes from Sham to Medina during the life of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. When he moved back to Medina, he asked about Imam Hassan. They said to him, oh, normally he would be in so and so place. He went and saw him. He asked, who is Hassan, son of Ali? Obviously he does not use any Imam and alayhi salam, none of that. Who is? They told him. He started cursing. Not just the Imam, but his father. And again, in Arabic culture, traditional culture, you just don't curse someone who's passed away, even if they had done something wrong. The worst thing you could do is to go to someone and curse their parents, their father, especially if they have passed away. The worst thing you could do. Basically, it's a death sentence. This is the culture that even prevails until today in many cases. Nevertheless, Imam Hassan alayhi salam waited for him to finish. Everybody around the Imam said, let us deal with him. Perhaps they would have beat him up, whatever. The Imam stopped them. And they were respectful of the Imam. They would not do anything without the command of the Imam salawatullah wasalam alayhi. When the man was done, the Imam asked him, He said, you seem to be a traveler, you seem to be a foreigner, stranger. Perhaps you've had a long journey, you're tired now. Let us take you to our home. We have a big home that we can accommodate you. Perhaps you're hungry. Let us offer you some food, some drink, some water. Offer you some clothes if you need some fresh clothes. Freshen up. You've had a long journey. The man was puzzled. He's cursing at the Imam and his father, and yet the Imam deals with him in that manner. I ask you a question. How many of us understand this concept even? Not apply it, understand it. How many of us can digest it, fully comprehend it, let alone put it into practice? If the Imam salawatullah wa salamu alayhi was able to deal with someone who is an enemy of his father and cursing at him and his father in that manner, how should I deal with my neighbors? How should I treat my colleagues at work who are not necessarily my enemy? They don't want to harm me. They don't want me dead. They're simply colleagues at work. I had a friend, I was in Vancouver at the time, one of the community members, he said, I work as a painter. And I work with people who are of a different group of faith, Sikh. They wear turbans. Some of you may have seen them. And they actually, generally speaking, they got a lot of discrimination because they were assumed Muslims. After 9/11, many of them share stories of how people mistreated them because they assumed that they're Muslims. They look, perhaps the beard, the turban, and so on. Nevertheless, this man, he said, he came to me one day and he said, I work with these people. How do I treat them? They treat me so well. They gave me a job. They try and accommodate me with my family and my family needs. If I ever have to leave, when he had a father, paternity leave or something, they offered that to him. They helped him a lot, and they also sometimes bring me food. They try to dine with me and so on at work. How do I deal with them? He found it difficult even with regards to food and what we can and cannot eat because of their kindness. And I want to finish my side of the discussion, and if anyone has questions, with this story. Imam Ali alayhi salam was traveling with an individual. And that individual was not a believer, was not a Muslim. They were traveling, and part of their journey, as you travel, back in the day, it wasn't like now where everyone is in their car. You are not in any kind of conversation with anyone else, and if anything, it is competitive, or the only interaction with other people is, or socialization with other people, is when you're trying to take over, or they cut you off and you're trying to get back at them, and so on. The reason I'm sharing this is because at some point I lived in a city. I don't want to backbite the entire population of a city, so I won't mention where, but they lacked sunlight, or they didn't have enough sunshine, sunny days, and it was cold, and therefore they didn't have enough interaction with one another. And when they go to the shops, everything is drive-through, and so there's not much interaction. And so the comment I made they suggested because they lack vitamin D, they're all depressed and so on. They lack faith. That's why they're depressed. Anyone with faith would not need vitamin D. Vitamin D is a necessity, but to not be depressed and to be rude is not an issue of lacking vitamin D. It's lacking faith. In any case, their interaction was in the streets and how they drove very, very rudely. If you indicated that you wanted to change lanes, that's when they speed up not to let you in. And you may have seen it in some cities. Basically, they don't let anyone in. Their interaction on the street was very rough. I said, if these people were to actually stand and talk to each other, there would be a lot of fights, the way they drive again. In any case, back in the day it was different. When they traveled, they would talk, okay, where are you going? And they would find out that, okay, they're traveling in the same direction. So they would interact with each other. The Imam was traveling in a direction, another man traveling. Most of their way, they were in the same direction until they had to go separate ways. Now, the narration says that when the man reached a position where he's going on a separate way, he realized that Imam Ali alayhi salam followed him, he was following him on his, basically they reached an intersection, and this man is going to his direction, and the Imam followed him. So he said to him, I thought you said you're going in the other direction. He said, yes, I'm walking a little bit with you as a token of appreciation of our company, to tell you that I'm not bored of our company, I am accompanying you. In Arabic, this concept is called mushaya'a, to walk with someone, as a token of your appreciation of the company that you had with them. The man said, where is all these beautiful things that I've seen from you? This was the last straw. But he had seen so much beauty from the Imam throughout his journey that at that point he's like, this is just beyond what I can understand. He says, where is all this from? He said, this is from our religion. I'm a student of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi. As a result, that man at that point said, I want to be a follower of that. If this is who you follow, I want to follow him. This is amazing. Now, I shared the first part of the story or the conversation I had with this man about him working with those people. My answer to him was this story. You may wonder, why did I bring that? Was my answer. That these people are kind to you, how should we be? Even kinder. We follow the best of the best. We follow Nabi al-Rahmah, the Prophet of mercy, that was sent as a mercy to the worlds. Unless someone is your enemy trying to harm you, you need to be the kindest, the most merciful, the most loving, the most forgiving. And even if they are your enemy and there is room for reconciliation and peace, what is best? Quran says, وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. Peace is always best, reconciliation is always best. But obviously, if somebody is not in that position and wants to harm, then Quran also tells us, أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ رُحَمَاءُ بَيْنَهُم, and that's part of the mercy, is to stop, part of the mercy and spreading mercy on earth, spreading goodness on earth is not to allow oppressors to continue with their oppression. If anyone has any questions or any suggestions, otherwise we will conclude, inshallah. No questions? Alhamdulillah. So inshallah, I'll request everyone to remember all the mu'mineen and mu'minat who passed away from our gathering, especially the martyrs who were martyred recently, for the mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to their souls, and for the well-being of all those who are unwell and in difficulty. We all ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant them the well-being and His mercy. with the recitation of Al-Fatiha مع الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. بسم الله.